There are two questions that I receive all the time. The first one is, what focal length should I use for this landscape photo? And the second question is, what lens should I buy for my landscape photography? This is the purpose of this video, to answer to this specific question. What are the perfect focal lengths for landscape photography and what lens you should buy? So at the end of this video, you will find out my conclusion about the perfect focal length for landscape photography, and I think my conclusion will come as a small surprise for some of you. And the second thing that I'm going to tell you is what lens I have in my backpack. Now, I will start with the range of 17 to 20 millimeter lens. I think for me it's the widest focal length that I used. I have to understand that using such a wide focal length, it's not a beginner-friendly lens or focal length to use. The simple reason is because when you have that focal length, everything is going to be in your shot. So framing the subject properly, framing the composition, giving it a purpose to your photo, and using the entire surface of the photo may be a little difficult for a beginner photographer. So I would not recommend starting off with a wide focal length as a beginner photographer. But of course, it's up to you what you choose. Now, the thing that you also have to consider when using a wide focal length is that the foreground element is going to seem bigger. It's going to look a lot more impressive, a lot more bigger. The perspective is going to be much more dynamic. And the background elements are going to diminish in size. And this is a thing that you have to take into consideration, because usually the subject is in the background in landscape photography. So you don't want to have a foreground element that is too imposing and then background elements that are looking really small and telling the audience that, okay, this small mountain is my subject. Another thing that you have to be careful is to spread the composition on the entire surface of the photo. You don't have to create a composition that has elements only on some area of the photo. You need to go across all the surface of the photo, because this way the entire image will make sense. Also, be very careful of how you include elements of composition and how do you guide the attention of the viewer to the point of interest. Use light and shadow. Usually you will position yourself in areas of shadow and photograph towards light if you want to create a certain type of separation. Using a wide focal length, it's going to make the sense of depth easier, because of course you see foreground elements and then you see background elements. And if you're wondering how do you get photos that have everything in sharp when you have really close foreground elements, you have two options. You either go for focus stacking, but sometimes in nature when there's a little bit of wind and things are moving, that focus stacking technique, it's not that useful. So you should close your aperture even to f/22, and don't be afraid about diffraction, because the modern day lenses are pretty sharp even at f/22, and also the editing software from today let you sharpen your photos as much as you want. So you go with f/22, you place your focus in the background, and then you get a depth of field starting at infinity and going up to the hyperfocal length that you're having for that particular combination of focal length, sensor, distance, and distance of focus, and aperture, of course. The next focal length that I want to talk about is the 24 millimeter. Now, this focal length is a much more, is easier to use even for beginner photographers. The perspective, it's not that dynamic. It's starting to lose that force that drives the viewer in. But because it doesn't include that many elements, it makes life a lot easier when you want to use that focal length. I'm using it primarily when I'm going inside cities and when I'm going inside forests. Now you can see this photo of Seceda in the Dolomites, and it was a cloudy day, and I had some sunlight only on some areas of the mountain. So I decided to go for a contrasty image right from the start and use the gradiated 3-stop filter on the top to dim down the brightness of the clouds. Of course, I've got to get away even without an ND gradiated filter, but sometimes it makes the process of taking photos a lot more interesting, if you want. So as I told you, I use this focal length a lot in the cities because of the lens that I have. Now 24 doesn't distort things that much. With a 17mm, I would have to be extra careful not to have the verticals going like this or going like this. So you need to be a little bit more careful to details. But with the 24, you get away with things like this. Always create interesting diagonals in your photos, like in this image right now, having the road starting to my left and ending to my right. It creates a really dynamic perspective. I like to photograph trees a lot and forests, and when I have the light coming from my front, when I'm photographing into the light and that light brightens up the leaves of the trees, then it looks really well, and especially if the tree has some really interesting branches. Now with the 24mm, you're going to see photos of foggy forests. And if you follow me, you know that foggy forests are my favorite subject as a landscape photographer, and the 24mm is my minimum focal length that I'm going to use, that I'm using for forest photography. And you will start to see these kind of photos when I talk about different focal lengths. Now 24, it's fairly wide. Don't think that you're going to use a 24 and miss out all the shots that have powerful foreground elements, but it's a lot easier to use as a beginner photographer, as I told you. Now the next focal length that I want to talk about, it's the famous 35mm. When I'm using the 35mm focal length, I'm starting to think more of close-ups. I don't look necessarily for foreground elements, and I also start thinking about taking panoramas. So 35, I think, is the minimum that I will go when I photograph a panorama, and I always keep the camera in portrait mode when I'm doing this. Yeah, even though I have foreground elements, they don't look like foreground elements. Like in this shot, for example, I have a frame inside a frame. Pretty much resembles the way we are seeing the world, and that's why I think 35 is such a used focal length. And of course, my foggy forest, where I place myself in an area of darkness and photograph towards the light. Here's a panorama, for example. And when you're going to include foreground elements, you need to take into consideration that because it's a 35mm, you will have to stay a little further away from the foreground to make sure you have everything in sharp. It's another great focal length for photographing inside cities. The next set of focal lengths that I want to talk about is from 50mm up to 85mm. When I'm using this focal range, I primarily use it to do close-ups, and I can do close-ups of mountains because the mountain is really far away. I'm not going to be really close to the mountain, so I can do close-ups of mountains, and I look for areas of shadow and light a lot, because this is a very simple way to create depth in your photos. Now, I don't use this lens to include foreground element. You could do so, but I don't. So in order to convey depth in my photos, I need some way to differentiate the planes, and having some area of the photo in the shadows and another area of the photo in light helps a lot with it. Of course, my forests are perfect for this kind of focal range, so it's something that I use a lot. Now the next set is from 85mm to 105mm. Still think about everything as a close-up. I think everything that goes above 50mm for me, I'm thinking more about details, but there are kind of like 3 stages of details: 50 to 85. Now it's 85 to 105, where planes are getting more compressed because as the focal range increases, the perspective loses dynamic and the planes are starting to look more compressed. And it's a very interesting thing. That's why I also separated this set in 3 stages: 50 to 85, 85 to 105, and the last one, because I think as a landscape photographer you should train your eye to know exactly what you can frame with the focal length range that you have with you. The last range of focal lengths that I'm going to talk about, it's 105mm up to 200mm. I don't feel the need to use focal lengths above 200mm, so this is the most I would go. And what you need to consider when using focal lengths that long is that you need only to concentrate on elements, not necessarily elements that are farther away, but elements that you can frame almost like a portrait. Now you still need to use techniques that will convey depth in your photo. Like for example, you see in this image I have different ridges of mountains that have different intensities of light on them, and when you have shadow, light, and this kind of a contrast, the human eye can sense depth. You also concentrate on details like this with the pine trees in the fog, or some trees in a lake. Details like this, the morning sunlight on some rocks. It also helps a lot with compressing the fields and compressing the perspective. And things that are far away become a lot bigger in comparison with things that are a lot closer to you. Like in this situation when I photographed the moon over there. It helps have a true feeling of how big or how huge something is in nature. Like for example, in this photo, you have a feeling of how really big and impressive that mountain from the right is compared to the small refuge over there. So it helps a lot. Now, the focal length of 200mm, I don't use it that much. I mostly stay between 24mm and 105mm. And as a conclusion to this video, I think that every focal length is perfect for a certain type of landscape. And that is why I have 3 lenses with me. I have 17 to 40mm, 24 to 105, and 70 to 200. Now, if I know that I'm going to photograph inside the forest or inside the city, I only bring my 24 to 105 with me, and maybe the 17 to 40 when I go to photograph inside cities. But in the forest, the only lens that I'm using is the 24 to 105. This is my main idea, my main take on what is the best focal length for landscape photography. Now, until next time, keep on photographing because it's the only way to get better. And thanks for watching. Bye-bye.